and action. Welcome to another incredible episode of the Action Podcast in Paul's old-time classic movies. We are on episode 4 of this podcast, and today's movie, we're going to be talking about Modern Times from 1936. You can watch this currently on HBO Max. Before I get into the rest of it, of course, I want to welcome back Drew Stewart, my co-host for this podcast. Drew is one of the few people that is down to watch some old ass movies, and yeah, that's a big part of this podcast. Is every week I would try and watch something I've never seen before, something typically older, and I try and do it kind of like almost like a chore. Instead of watching something I've seen before or whatever, watch something I've never seen before, kind of continue to gain my knowledge in film. And so that's kind of the genesis of this podcast. And I knew Drew loves old films. So basically any film between 1980, that's the goal of this film. And ideally, either I really don't remember it at all, or I've never seen it before. That's kind of the goal. And obviously we don't watch some of the big time classics that people talk about and you're like, oh man, I haven't seen that yet. So that's kind of the goal of this podcast. And so again, with Modern Times, Charlie Chaplin is one of the stewards of the silent era, one of the greatest filmmakers of all time in general. But this is now a new era for him where he's, still making films, but sound is now here. And so this one is definitely still a silent film, but he incorporates some sound techniques. We'll talk about that a little bit. But again, directed by Charlie Chaplin. His probably most famous film that you know him from is The Gold Rush. If you've never seen that, he's got this great little scene in that where he plays with the shoes. I mean, that's an excellent scene. He's also done The Great Dictator, which came out in the 40s. That's essentially kind of like a Hitler spoof. Before spoofs were even a thing. I mean, he basically invented the spoof. Almost a Mel Brooks, if you will. And City Lights, which is the other movie we're possibly going to see. But we'll definitely be City Lights and The Great Dictator will both be. Eventually, we'll see him on this podcast. So stay tuned for those. Those are like the three main ones of Chaplin I still haven't seen yet. So in the premise of this movie, the tramp struggles to live in modern industrial society with the help of a young homeless woman. IMDB rating, guys, 8.5. This is the 49th highest ranked movie of all time. So this is a film you watch in film school, you learn about it. This is a big time film, and we'll go into some of those reasons why. But this was not a box office success. This had a budget of 1.5 million, gross just under 450K. I would assume eventually it made money just because, again, it's on HBO Max. We just watched it. It's always the DVD sales and, VHS sales, I'm assuming, have eventually made its money, but don't know if Chaplin got any of that. But Modern Times has won many awards and honors. It's one of the first 25 films selected by the Library of Congress for preservation in the United States National Film Registry for being culturally, historical, and aesthetically significant. That's essentially the Hall of Fame for films, people. The United States National Film Registry. If your film gets in that, that's the Hall of Fame. And so in 2003, it was screened out of competition at the Cannes Film Festival. So Drew, we'll get right into it. What was your favorite thing about this film?
So to answer your question, I think he did make his money. I looked up his net worth because I was curious about that as well. I think he was in the hundreds of millions by the time he passed away. So I think in perpetuity, his royalties must have been all right.
And his other films, he had a lot of huge crushes.
Yeah.
And he also owned a production company that was making other films too. So yeah, he did it right.
Yeah, he was a business for sure.
Yeah.
So favorite thing about the movie was just sort of how prescient it was, like how much it was all over the social aspect and the economic problems and things happening in the 1930s. And I like for a black and white, silent film, though, it was super interesting to actually have sound and a little bit of some dialogue in there. I would say it felt incredibly progressive. For all those, just kind of despite all those things looking back at it, but at the time, I'm sure it was relatively progressive, especially for the sort of hybrid of the silent. But for me, it was how much it nailed what was going on in the 1930s and really was poking fun and really had some hard commentary and cynicism throughout it the whole way, um, for a variety of different topics. And I'm going to get to it when we talk about does it hold up, for sure. But that for me, it was just how bang on it was discussing the 1930s and all of the warts that was happening in America at the time.
Yeah, I definitely can't disagree with that. My favorite thing, only because it's just the most, for me, it's always the most memorable thing about this movie. I mean, again, it's like, even as a kid, I felt like I saw a scene of this, and you've probably seen it in some sort of montage whenever they talk about movies in general. But it's the scene where he's going through like the nuts and bolts of the machine.
Yeah.
And, one, just how they executed that. I think they literally built like a thing for him to go in that was obviously safe. That's where a lot of the budget went, I believe, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, makes sense.
But again, you're talking about one of the most iconic scenes in film history. Again, any montage that talks about film history, I guarantee you've seen this clip. And so, again, to me, just like to be able to create something and again always be remembered by other people and people 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years later, that to me is like really why we make films and make these. And um yeah, we can go right into, does this movie hold up? um I'm going to finish what I'm just going to say, and then we'll go back to you. But I think when you're talking about, I think it's very important to watch this with a lens as opposed to just watch this movie like I'm watching a brand new movie for the first time. I think that's a bad lens to watch this in. It's kind of to me like Rebel Without a Cause, because it's important to understand the context of when this film is made. And again, it's a this is considered the Charlie Chaplin's goodbye film of the silent era. This was the ending of the silent era. And those are some of the things, again, you almost watch him more as a historian versus just, hey, I'm here to entertain us for an hour and a half. I think that's an important distinction, because I would agree this film is not going to be for everybody. If you're just looking to be entertained for an hour and a half, there are a lot of better films to watch in terms of that. That'll get the job done a lot easier, right? But this is, like Drew's saying, a historical piece, a time, a film that's made in during this time of a lot of distress for people, and it really does have hardcore social commentaries. It's almost like Drew. Um, what was that one film we just watched with Sidney Poitier? Hour, Midnight Hour? No,
In the heat of the night.
In the Heat of Night. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Where that film was made in the '60s, and they're talking about like hardcore civil rights issues while it's actually happening, versus you're making a film today about civil rights issues in the '60s. So I always find it interesting, because I can't even imagine when you're watching this film and you're just like, wow, okay, what am I watching here? You know what I mean? So I think that's a very, very important distinction when you're watching this.
I agree. So is that does it hold up?
No, I'll have one more other point. I just I
Oh,
wanted to.
okay. So one last piece to the favorite part is at the end, like the big unveiling of him finally talking in a film, and it was singing and singing gibberish was
Yeah, yeah,
brilliant.
yeah.
It was totally brilliant. Does it hold up? Yeah, I think it's as important today as it was then, for the commentary. So, I talked to and referenced about how, as a historical piece, all of the things that it was saying about the 1930s. I I mean, look at all of those same themes alive and well in 2023. You
Yeah.
know, insert artificial intelligence for, mechanization and the
Yeah.
assembly line. And I mean, it's crazy. So it absolutely holds up. The themes were
And even
relevant
even
then.
to Drew, like the another good comparison is like how you always, when you see people now, you see them staring at their phones, and their head is down when people are talking. They may be on their phones, and that would be very similar to when he's doing his, on the assembly line, and then he gets out and he still has those like machinations, and
He's
it's
just, yeah.
that's like a yeah, I agree. Like that's a
ladies walking by.
huge, yeah, similarity of today.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say, um, in addition to that, so there's the theme about sort of the mechanization. Like there's other pieces to it too, like class struggle, right? The homeless, the homeless issue that is obviously so prevalent today. Um,
Wages.
wages, the police, and sort of how police deal with
Oh, the
people.
police were on it back then, man. I wish police were.
But like the way they responded to protesting. So I mean,
Yeah, I was
you know
all
what
right.
I mean, it's like almost a century later, so many of these themes are the same. So absolutely holds up. Brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, again, I think again the biggest context is it's definitely relatable today's time. Does the movie hold up purely on a filmmaker standpoint in terms of like, of course, this is again a silent film, so like I want to make that distinction for people because it's very, again, if you're a very casual movie watcher, yeah, I don't know if this movie is going to be for you. You have to, I think, definitely have a little bit of thirst for history, knowledge, and again, like even again, social commentary. Again, this is a super super heavy social commentary movie that wasn't as prevalent back then as it is now. You know what I mean? And the crazy part is, so he gets busted in this movie for having communist things. In real life, he was also busted for the same thing because he thought it. Now, obviously, now in hindsight, Charlie Chaplin was not part of the communist movement. He was definitely part of like the labor and the socialist-ish type of thing, but he was also a capitalist too. So it's also very important to understand that he was not a quote unquote communist when you're watching that. Obviously, you get like Drew was saying, he made tons of money over the years. He was a big capitalist. He actually, again, on the historical side, he was one of the first artists that started their production company because he wanted freedom from the systems to make what he wanted. Um, Obviously, keep more of the revenue that he wanted to do and just keep making movies. So he's a very unique person in film history because he's kind of like a lot of different characters wrapped into one. But he was also a very social, you know, uh, um, activist, for lack of a better word, when it came to a lot of this stuff. So, but yeah, I would agree. I think you said everything perfectly. I don't really need to add much um, to that. Contemporary comparison. I couldn't even remotely try and think of one just because it was silent. I guess the best. I mean, maybe I already did say it, which was In the Heat of the Night. I guess maybe that's my comparison because again, it's dealing with such a heavy social issue when exactly it's being made. Um, the only other one I would give you, dude, is, and this is this is unique, but hear me out, is Contagion. Because Contagion was made not that long ago. And then if you watch it, if you watch it now, there's so many similarities to what we dealt with in the pandemic. And that was written before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And so, to me, if you're talking about dealing with a huge issue in America and then being spot on, that's where I would go. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, not the silent piece makes it hard, right? But
Yeah. You have to throw away the silent piece because obviously that's
yeah,
not
yeah.
gonna.
For me, it was, and I already kind of mentioned AI, was Ex Machina, however you say
Yeah,
that.
Machina, yeah.
You know, from God, it's probably closer to 10 years ago now. But at the time, I remember thinking like, oh, this is a crazy science fiction movie. And oh my God,
Yeah.
so much of it is already on the way, if not already here.
Yeah.
So I would say for me, that would be my most modern sort of comparison of just sort of like an artistic take on sending the world a message of like, uh-oh, guys, like this is coming and it's
Yeah.
going to change everything that we have thought we've known about people, human interaction, governments, etc.
Yeah. And then if I had to go with a movie back during that time, the closest thing I can think of is kind of Grapes of Wrath that
Yeah.
also dealt with a lot of that time period and was also made during back then. Which again dealt with that was a little bit later, I believe. I know, actually, I think it was around the same time.
I think it was 30s, and it was Dust Bowl,
It came out
and
in 40. I know it came out in 1940.
the
So
film did, but the book was written in the 30s.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and what I will say about Charlie Chaplin, similar to what you're saying about John Steinbeck, is if I had to equate him to somebody like, yeah, he definitely has a capitalist in him, but like kind of like Woody Guthrie vibes to me too, in terms of like what Woody Guthrie was doing in songwriting, talking about
Explain to the audience who that is because I don't know.
he wrote "This Land Is Your Land," which most people,
Okay.
think of it as like almost like a national anthem.
Yeah, yeah.
We only sing the first verse or two, and it goes on to like be like basically a communist manifesto.
Oh,
The rest
I
is
think I've heard
like
that. Yeah.
super ironically mispurposed by America. And like so he was very much like in the Steinbeck, Chaplin, getting his certainly like not turning down royalty checks, but writing about, sort of the downtrodden
Yeah.
and the people in the country that like needed to be lifted up.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, this is the difficult question here. Should this movie be remade today, and who should it star?
It's a hard question, right? Like, would I recommend somebody that needed to like have a big enough star to bring people in and pay them to make a silent film? I don't know. But could this film be remade in some way, shape, or form? Absolutely. And let's say I even wanted it to go down a similar path of like maybe more physical comedy and less dialogue. I was thinking about this, like racking my brain, who could do it? And I kind of feel like Kevin Hart would be sneaky great as
I
Charlie
like
Chaplin.
that. I like that.
Um,
Uh,
like physically he's smaller. He's like his face obviously is so much emotion in it. He's hilarious.
yeah,
I
that's
think
very
Kevin Hart,
nice. He
I
might
feel
have
like
just made a few $1 million right now with that suggestion. That
yeah,
the script would need a lot of work, but
no, it would. And that's like always, I wouldn't know exactly what it would look like, but I do think there is room for it to be remade, and I feel like Kevin Hart could do a great job.
yeah. Um, so I'm going to answer it in two different ways. Should this be remade today? Like even in a cycle remotely close? Absolutely not. Because I think that's what made that movie was already a juxtaposition at the time because it was a silent film when sound was already thing. That's pretty much why it was a box office disaster, for lack of a better word. Because when a movie doesn't make $1 million and the budget was $1 million, like you're talking like made half of what you needed to make it, right? So I don't think it should be remade today in its current form. However, could you take parts of this movie and write it? Because again, a lot of the storyline too. I've always felt this when I watch silent films. Silent film should be about 45 minutes. Why? Because when there's no with no dialogue and it's just action, dialogues are what take obviously a lot of time, right? But when you remove that and it's just action, it's like you're tripling the length of a movie, right? So even I felt this movie was a little long. There's definitely scenes that really can be cut out and you'll be just fine. It's not gonna, it's almost to me, it felt like almost two to three different movies at times. I think there's a lot of ways to cut through it. Go ahead.
No, I don't want to interrupt you, but I'll get back to that because I agree. Continue.
And so I would definitely take a part of this. There's almost like the middle part that just kind of felt off or whatever, or just longer. And I was like, okay, it's a little too long. Like when it introduced the female protagonist, um,
The love story didn't really work.
no, and it was really unnecessary because
And it wasn't a love story because it couldn't be in the 30s, like it wouldn't like they couldn't
yeah,
even be in the same house.
yeah, it was. And again, she didn't get introduced till like 20 minutes in the movie,
Yeah.
and it was already going a certain direction, and it had to like you're saying, it had to pivot back, and yeah, I there would take a lot of work to do it. I think it can, but again, it would be a lot of eliminating. It'd be more similar to the movie versus like this is a dead remake of this. You know what I mean? I
I
mean,
agree. Yeah, I agree 100%.
but I
But
love your comparison of Kevin Hart. Um, I think that may be just perfect. But I agree, it's got to be some sort of physical comedian.
yeah. What I was gonna say, to your point about it could have been two or three movies, like two or three, four or five. Like to me, it was like just a series of vignettes, and maybe that's I need to watch more silent films. Maybe that's the way they were, almost like stage plays and acts.
Yes,
Uh,
they were. Yeah.
but it was like it felt like it was a series of vignettes, and I feel like the funny thing is like a lot of this movie has been remade
Yeah.
in various different shows, like the Lucille Ball
Oh, 100% on
on
the
the
assembly
chocolate
line.
on the assembly line, right?
Yeah, yeah, for
I
sure.
know that was a while ago, but like I feel like how many TV shows and movies has there been a conceit of somebody staying in the mall overnight or in the department store overnight and sleeping in the home goods
Yeah.
section? You know what I
Even just
mean?
Bad Santa just took from that like not that long ago. So
100%. So I feel like in a way, many elements of this movie has already been remade,
yeah.
just in small vignettes and homages.
Yeah, 100%. The other one, it just kind of came to me, but I could also see Bill Burr work in this role too. He's less physically comedic, but man, would he be hilarious being on that assembly line and just having people yell at him like I mean, I don't know if you saw Old Dads yet, but
I
I,
haven't. I hope so.
he's kind of that was kind of a social commentary on a little bit of the wokeness and just everybody being super hypersensitive. And so I think Bill Burr definitely has that working man not only look but has that voice that I definitely think could really handle this role very well. Again, I would throw out the love story aspect of it. You'd already be kind of married.
Yeah.
But him trying to him working in kind of a factory type setting and just losing that struggle, I can easily see that. I mean, that's actually not a bad script idea. We could literally be making tons of millions of dollars in this podcast right now.
Let's go.
So stay tuned, audience. Stay tuned. All right, let's move into our last section here, and this is of course our top five. This is usually my favorite part of the whole thing. So top five 1930s films. We could have went in a lot of different directions, but we went this one just because Drew is not as, and I appreciate his honesty. He's not a silent film historian as much as not that I am, but I've seen at least 30, so I could make a list. But
I just didn't want to. I didn't want to be untruthful in terms of like what I've
no, no,
seen.
no, totally, totally. I'm fine with that. But yeah, 1930s. This is an interesting decade. I wrote down just for the audience's. I've definitely seen more than this number, but ones that I'd be like I actually liked and enjoyed. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And there's more that I didn't even bother that I probably need to rewatch because I saw them so long ago I don't remember. So those could also be on our list. There's a few of them I'm like, we should probably watch this movie. So I'm
I
kind of
agree. There's several that I would be down to go back and watch.
yeah, we'll definitely be checking one of them out. But yeah, so we'll do it again 5-1 and we'll rotate. So we'll start with you. What is your number five
So I
movie?
wanted in the same spirit of I haven't seen a lot of silent films. I wanted to put Stagecoach on there because I know it's amazing. Have if I have seen it, I've forgotten it, so I can't put it on there. But I
Yeah,
imagine it'll be on your list, so we'll be safe there. I'm putting it on there only because of its historical and filmmaking sort of importance.
yeah,
I hate this movie. Gone with the Wind is my number five. And what I shouldn't say I hate it. I just wouldn't. I would be perfectly fine not to watch it again. But
yeah.
I completely and fully acknowledge its significance in filmmaking in the 30s.
Yeah, I'm with you. I agree. I did not put it on my list only because, like I said, I've seen enough movies where I just don't find it as entertaining as some of these other ones.
Yeah,
Um, but I agree with you on its cultural significance and film his significance. The number five spot, man, I was debating. There's a lot of ones I had to cut off that I really want to include, and we'll give our we'll give a couple of honorable mentions. But I'm gonna go up with this one because I definitely think it's one of the best screwball comedies of this era. And if you're looking for that type of a movie where people are like, "Hey, I want to see what's the best example of that kind of movie," I think this one is it. And it's a movie called Bringing Up Baby. This is also directed by our boy Howard Hawks. We talked about it last week, but that's Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant, I believe. Or it's either Cary Grant or Gregory Peck, one of those guys. but
Yeah.
it actually really is pretty entertaining and pretty funny. Um, uh, their dynamic dynamicism between the two is really good, and I haven't seen it in many years, but I know I think I bought it, but I need to watch it again. But I just remember watching. I'm like, wow, this is actually a really good movie, and again, very significant, and it won the Oscar, I believe, for that year as well. So if you want to see one of the best iterations of a comedy in 1930s, I think that's one of it. Screwball comedies. And then my number four, some would argue this is the best film of the 1930s. And when you just look at the stats, this is one of the most successful films of all time. Um, this is directed by Frank Capra, and it happened one night. This won like 5+ Oscars, I think, which at the time no one even won like that many. And so this was just a great film. Well made. Frank Capra, he also made It's a Wonderful Night. No, that's not the word.
It's Wonderful Life.
It's a Wonderful Life. Excuse me. Yeah, I invented a new movie. It's a Wonderful Life. So if you like If It's a Wonderful Life, that's Frank Capra. You're gonna love this one because this one is even a better crafted film, but it's got a lot of the same mechanisms and emotion. Frank Capra is just one of the best dramatic slash comedic directors of all time, and that's why he is my number four pick.
Awesome. My number four is also Frank Capra. But it's not that film. I chose Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Barely clinging to the 30s, kind of early days, one of the first major introductions to Jimmy Stewart, who also starred in It's a Wonderful Life in a couple years, which I love that film. It's a Wonderful
Oh,
Life.
Drew, that's a great pick.
I
Drew.
know it's cheesy, but Jimmy Stewart, in addition to having a great last name, phenomenal actor, great movie.
I used to
Loved
have
all.
a really good Jimmy Stewart impression, but
I
now
wasn't bad. That was pretty decent.
it's not bad. I haven't worked on it. I would just need to work on it a little bit better.
Political, again, a little bit of satire and all that. So a great film. Um, Number three for me is was an interesting one to choose. I'm choosing it because of it's a very good film, and it stars one of my favorite bad guys slash like sad sacks of the 30s and 40s, Peter Lorre. Um, is M
Oh
by,
yeah.
by Fritz Lang. And not only is it a very good and entertaining movie, because it became so mainstream from a non-Hollywood filmmaker, from a foreign filmmaker, to me, it was very important and needed to be on the list for the 30s.
Yeah, I mean, if you it's number one for many people on their list. So, obviously you're not gonna get a lot of argument from a lot of different people.
Yeah.
My number three, again, you want to talk about one of the most successful films of the 1930s. Um, I'm not necessarily saying it's my third favorite film, but I just think I have to put it this high because A, I've seen it multiple times, and I think it's it's one of the most it's probably the most relevant film from the 30s, but it's Wizard of Oz. And this was the first film that utilized color. It was part of the film. And so again, the historical, when you add it all up, I think again, you kind of have to include Wizard of Oz. And it's like, who hasn't seen Wizard of Oz? Even today, parents will show kids Wizard of Oz. It's really never been truly remade, and I think that just shows you how well crafted the film actually is and how memorable it still is today. So I had to put that number three. And again, for some people, that could be their number one. Probably a lot of people would be their number one because it's the only film they've seen in the 1930s, right? Besides Gone with the Wind. My number two, you had already mentioned it, but Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. I think, you know, there's not too many like I always think about like what do I remember from these films? Like we just talked about in modern times, I remember that scene from Charlie Chaplin. And in Mrs. Smith Goes to Washington, he has like one of the best closing speeches like you'll ever hear in movies. Like
Yeah.
I remember watching the first time and it was very powerful and it still holds up. I think today it's well written, super culturally relevant. You know, and I think it's just a really well crafted film. And again, like you mentioned, it's Frank Capra. This is one of the best filmmakers of the time. That's why that's number two.
Great. Yeah. Um, and I can't believe I forgot what was the one you just said? Sorry, your number three?
Wizard of Oz.
Wizard of Oz. Like
Yeah.
very much in the vein of
Hey, I'm not gonna lie. This was a tough list. There's a few movies we're gonna name that I
it
didn't want.
was.
I wanted to include that I didn't.
Yeah, shame on me. I forgot that one. Okay. Number two is much for the film, but I wanted this filmmaker on the list because this is really where he got started. And I would say even he got started cooking, but I'm gonna put The Lady Vanishes, Alfred Hitchcock. There's a few different ones I could have
You
chosen
seen
from.
that one or no?
I have. There's a
Okay.
few different. Yeah, I love Hitchcock, and I've seen a lot of his films.
I love
Um,
Hitchcock. I've seen more of the 50s ones and the
for
late
sure.
40s. I haven't really seen the 30s ones.
There's a few in the 30s that I've seen. And so this one's great and is, sets a lot of the tone for what he is continuing to hone in his craft.
Yeah.
Um, and I just felt like I had to add a Hitchcock because
I
he
love it.
became
That's a great
became.
choice.
And then my number one is like I was really not struggling to put on here. I think it deserves to be number one. But it's kind of a crazy pick for me. It's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
That's
Um,
not crazy. If you want to
it's
talk about the other film from this era that most people know about today, it's that. And
Yeah, I mean it's the first full-length Disney feature,
yeah,
which started the Disney juggernaut,
yeah,
forever changed an entire segment of the industry and entertainment, and put Disney on the map and really just set them off on the trajectory.
absolutely. And
So,
again, the film holds up. I mean, it's
and
very
it's a good movie. It's
yeah,
still a good movie.
good movie, yeah.
So Snow
Not
White,
not looking forward to the remake where the is no longer the Seven Dwarfs, but
right?
this one is still, again, like some of these films I get like, okay, yeah, it's a little rough. That doesn't hold up. But this movie I still think works in a lot of different ways. And yeah, man, it's definitely one of the greatest films, not only of all time, but 1930s. And like you're saying, this is the number one animated film. I mean, this started literally the number one animated film of all time in terms of it's the first
Yeah,
one that we remember. So yeah, good job, man. That's a good list. Solid list. My number one, again, you kind of already said it, so you really stole a lot of my thunder on my list.
it's weird that on the snake we didn't do it to each other. Like I did it to you twice. Sorry.
Yeah. But it's Stagecoach. I mean, I've
Oh, I didn't
seen,
talk about it. I just guessed you'd put it on there.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, this is the film I've seen the most. John Ford is one of my favorite directors, if not my favorite director. I love westerns, and this is just like you said with Snow White, uh, to me, Stagecoach is the beginning of the real Westerns.
Yeah.
And again, I watch it probably at least once a year. And this is where you get to see really the first action scene in a Western in terms of a real legit chase scene where the camera is moving with the stagecoach. Like it's intense. There's actual Native Americans in the film. It's shot in Monument Valley. I mean, John Ford did this movie right. He wasn't perfect with a lot of stuff. He's definitely an outdated when it comes to some things, but he did a lot of things right. And you know, Native American representation is one of them. So there's definitely that authenticity with it. And then he knew kind of the formula that a lot of people got away from. But yeah, Stagecoach is it for me. Let's go. Let's just go back and forth with a couple honorable mentions, Drew. You go first, and we'll just keep going back and forth.
There's a couple of series of films at least started in the 30s starring Cary Grant that I watched as a kid that I remember very fondly. Topper. I don't know if
Okay,
you've
I
ever.
don't think I've seen that one.
Yeah, so that's an honorable mention for me.
Um, Probably the big one that I would say was the hardest to hold off was Scarface. Uh, Another film that probably I've seen over a handful of times. I wanted to include them. Just watch that one again. I think it's a very cool film that deals with that era, that's made in that era. Very significant, culturally significant.
So much better than the De Palma one. Uh, that's a good one. Adventures of Robin Hood with Errol Flynn was hard for me.
That's the one I need to see. I need to see that one. I don't think I've ever seen that one, but I know it's
It's
great.
good. He was a megastar at the time, and the
Yeah, yeah,
film was great. I love the Robin Hood story.
yeah.
So that was hard to leave off.
Yeah, I'm surprised I've never seen that one. I'm gonna put that on my list to watch. Another major one that I've seen many times, Frankenstein. Excellent book. The movie did it pretty good justice. Obviously, like this is the what kind of started to elevate Warner Brothers into another era as the monster movies and the gangster movies. And so, Frankenstein's actually that was the second one. Well, I'll just throw it in there because Dracula's the other one. That Dracula's the one that started, and then Frankenstein was a better film. But those were like the two that started it.
Got it. Um, yeah, I mean, there was quite a few other ones, like Angels with Dirty Faces.
I haven't seen that one
Literally,
either. That's one I want
I
to. I
have
want
only for the home because of
Home
the
Alone. Yeah,
how it resonates in Home Alone,
yeah.
and because of that. But anyway,
To be clear, audience, that's not the movie in Home Alone. That's the movie they made a fake movie, and that's the movie that's based off of.
right.
A lot of people don't know
Um, so yeah, it's that one, and then do you have any others?
At Gunga Din, that's kind of what Indiana Jones was based off of. I did watch that. That one's solid. I want to watch that again though. I feel like that could be higher on my list, but that's a good old adventure film in the 1930s. Gold Diggers of 1933. That's my favorite like musical of all time. That's like in the heyday. Bugsby Berkeley. But that was like one of the musicals that we watched in film school that I actually enjoyed, and I still remember to this day. So that was always one of mine. And then, of course, King Kong again, how significant that is. And 39 Steps, you were talking about Hitchcock. 39 Steps was a big one.
Yeah, I was gonna say 39 Steps, and I was also gonna say King Kong. King
Okay,
Kong
perfect.
is, so relevant.
Awesome. Well, people, that's going to wrap it up for today. Again, hopefully you're enjoying kind of where we're going with this podcast. Um, uh,
What are
our,
we watching next week?
well, next week we have a film called The Killing. We want to go film noir now. The Killing's made in 1956. It's directed by Stanley Kubrick. It's his third film, and you can watch that on Paramount Plus. And so that's what we're going to watch next week. Make sure you guys, if you give us your top 5 1930s films, if you want to comment about it. If you watch Modern Times, please give us your review. We want to hear about it. We'll give you some shout outs as well. And then make sure you tune in, watch The Killing, and we'll all watch that together next week. So again, thank you, Drew, for joining us today.
Thank you, sir, as always.
Yeah. And again, make sure you like, share, subscribe. And with that, that is a cut. Thanks, guys.